giving us the opportunity to actually dig deeper into Natalie Veenstra's practice and also amazing exhibition that we have here, Sincerity. What did I want to start with? I guess actually the first thing I wanted to do was just sort of quickly walk through the different works in this space. Just for those that are listening, they can see it as well as sort of know maybe more of the conceptual background with each work and sort of how they hinge together. So I wanted to start actually on the left-hand side, which is the work on the left is hanging on the wall, is Soft Underbelly. It is this purple, blue, soft thing that's sort of hanging, made of cotton muslin, that also looks like a gigantic carburetor, catalytic converter, which is the more expensive one. Yeah, this is me not knowing cars and trying to. But as we are all well aware of in Long Beach, there has been a string of sort of thefts of catalytic converters.
All across California.
Yeah.
And also the East Coast and everywhere.
Everywhere, and I think also yours was stolen.
Yeah, twice.
Twice. Oh shit.
On the same street within like a year or two, I think.
Oh damn.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, so there's that piece, RIP. And then the Serpent of 15th / Newport, which I'm guessing is the dreaded street that these catalytic converters are sort of swirling in the sort of graveyard of raccoon-fired catalytic converters as well here. Next, we have the piece Sincerity, which is this single person individual tent that is paneled and sort of handcrafted by you with all of these sort of hand-dyed fabrics, and they're all natural dyes. We'll get into that in a bit. And then finally behind us we have these quilted window stained glass pieces that are then also sort of tucked and of a similar architecture up here. Before we get into this story, I wanted you to tell us a little bit of the conceptual background that hinges the sort of tent, individual tent and windows. Oh yes, and then our little seat observer, which is High Neighbor, which is made out of complete ceramic, and then the little knitted sock, which is a little baby sock.
Okay, but
Sincerity.
So Sincerity is kind of based off of is directly based off of a tent that I sort of grew up in from the ages of like, I would say 9 to 12, in my grandmother's backyard, as like an extension of her house, after my family lost our home following the 2008 financial crisis. And it was it left a big impression on me. Kind of living like tucked away in the suburbs of outside of Los Angeles, feeling very vulnerable and isolated, but also at the same time very like splayed out to see in a very vulnerable way. And I wanted to recreate that. That was my goal for this residency, was to craft it hand by hand and kind of try to reimagine the narrative that I had around it.
Amazing. And then also just to clarify too, because I remember this detail from our past studio visit, you had an individual tent in this sort of larger tent that your family was living in this backyard, which again is also creating the sort of interior space for you to exist in within this sort of larger soft architecture. And so I wanted to get really into the word Sincerity, because it's not only the title for the sculpture, but it's also the title for the show. So I was wondering if you could explain the references that you're bringing for this word Sincerity.
I've kind of danced around the idea of the tent or the idea of addressing my childhood for a long time. I think I originally started depicting it in a couple years ago for a group show. I did like a drawing of it. But I've always, in my depictions of it, was sort of trying to conceal the actual narrative or talk about the tent without talking about my connection to the tent. And I wanted to kind of engage with this idea of sincerity, which to me means it's a little bit different from honesty or truth. It's a little bit more open to interpretation and sort of, I think we can interpret someone as being sincere without them being totally truthful. You know, they're making an attempt at being genuine, but they're not necessarily going to give you all the facts. They're giving their version.
Yeah.
Honesty, truth, but more of an intent rather than just laying it all.
And would you say that this sort of reflection back on the past is also tinged with emotion or things like that? And let me explain too. Some other times when we're looking to the past, we sometimes use the word nostalgia, which can sometimes be rife with sort of the problematics of how we sort of think about that time period now, or the agenda we have for the now.
Yeah.
So would you associate your work with nostalgia at all, or is it really like thinking about sincerity and honesty? And
Yeah, I mean, I think nostalgia is complicated. I think I was originally really reluctant to associate this with nostalgia, because I think nostalgia kind of implies a certain amount of yearning or romanticization of the past, which I don't, it's, you know, as I've kind of experienced this show more, I do think there's an element of romanticization, but I didn't feel like a yearning towards my childhood in that way, or at least this period in my childhood. So I didn't feel like nostalgia really felt right. But I did, when I initially approached the idea of the tent in my work, it was to answer a prompt about nostalgia originally. But I thought it was a little bit more complex than just words. It was, or even, or just looking back, or just bringing up, you know, symbols of the past. I thought it was a little bit more fantastical, I would say.
okay, yeah. Which sort of goes into my next question about how you have visualized memory here for us, because it is a very personal memory to you, and how you think about memory and just sort of how that comes across aesthetically here.
Well, I think memory is like, it's so easily distorted and not factual, and people can have can remember an event so differently. And for me, it's definitely not, you know, reaching into an organized file cabinet in my brain and pulling out a list of facts. It's more like, you know, flashes of a scene, little bits, sensations, and emotions. So for me, memory is trying to piece together a very jagged puzzle that is totally non-linear. So I wanted to, I think that's how I got to combining sort of a narrative from my childhood with something more present day. Because I think, in my mind, you know, these memories, even though they're so distinct in their time period, in my mind, they're kind of existing side by side.
And concurrently, yeah. But there is a scale shift, I would say, between them, because here in this tent, it actually is a very physical manifestation, a one-to-one.
Yeah.
And here, the catalytic converters are. This is an actual size, I can tell, as well as the tubes and things like that. And so, would you say that there's this emotional weight that you're giving them, or presentness, or what is your relationship to scale?
I think the scale of the tent, my desire to make it life-size was to bring it sort of more into a version of reality, like a new reality, so I wanted to have it be very one-to-one, and kind of remake it and understand it a little bit more. But the catalytic converters, the scale shift kind of came from me having no idea what a catalytic converter was or what it looked like. And I've never touched one, I've never really seen one in person. I think we have one in my storage unit from the Subaru that is not mine, and it's very small. But I have like no real idea of what a catalytic converter is other than like Google image searches.
Yeah.
And I wanted to kind of communicate that it is sort of a foreign object that I'm trying to bring into reality a little bit.
Yeah.
But I think that also ties into the idea of like, in our memories, things are never as big or small as we think they are. So, as a kid, you think everything is so gigantic. This chair is huge, this tent is tiny, and my dad's car is a beast or whatever. But in reality, the chair is tiny, the tent is small, or a manageable size. But this thing is kind of like it for me, it defies memory in a way also, because I don't actually have a memory of this thing that I've never seen it.
It's almost like this mythologized thing now, in the lore of what it means to be like sort of existing in an urban landscape. And when you're thinking about these works, you seem to be talking about them together, and you think about them as one installation, or are they all sort of individual things to be encountered separately?
I think in a way both. I think I've thought about displaying both separately. I think they work stronger together, as this idea of blending memories and fact and fiction. But I think that the narrative that they create together is just more interesting to me. This idea of our adult selves kind of rewriting history, rewriting the past, and choosing which memories we keep and which we change.
Which you've been enacting through these various materials. Before I move into some of the other conceptual stuff, I really actually wanted to dig deeper into the fact that this is actually a material shift for you. In your other exhibitions, you worked in ceramics, and so now you've started going into this world of dyeing your own fabrics and then also putting them together. So I was wondering, just as an observer, why you made that shift, and what did it help you do or accomplish, or how is it also working with fabric?
I think I started making the shift towards fabric just so that I could introduce like softness, transparency, flexibility to my work. Ceramics are so rigid and fragile, and once you break it, you break it. Although I will say that most of these are broken in some way, but they're a little harder to mend. And there's sort of an illusion to the way they are mended also. Whereas fabric, it can be patched back together kind of in a very honest way. You see the way it's patched back together, and I started working with fabric to bring lightness to my work. I didn't want to completely move away from ceramics. I still like the rigidity and the shine, and also its unique fragility. But I did want to just bring another element into my vocabulary. And then the dyeing, I really fell in love with sort of because of its similarity to glaze chemistry. I enjoy making my own glazes, and a lot of the chemicals that you use to bring out color in natural dyes are the same as the chemicals you use in glaze. Calcium carbonate and alumina and things like that. You all use
In glazes.
In glazes and dyes. So I also enjoyed one element of ceramics that people love is the unpredictability of the color. You often don't know what you're going to get, depending on what processes you're using, and it's sort of the same with natural dye. So there's this element of like, okay, I'm giving part of my work up to an unpredictable process, and the chemistry and the process will sort of decide what it is.
Yeah. And then color-wise, did you know that it would turn out mostly like this, or was it like these like beautiful like tangerine oranges, or the pink salmons, or the or the indigo?
I knew like the general palette. I didn't know if it was going to be successful and if I would end up with all the colors that I wanted. Natural dyes can go skew more muted or brown or gray out or wash out completely or just not stick to the fabric that you chose. So it turned out much more successful than I was expecting. All the colors were more vibrant than I was expecting, and I ended up with a really broad palette that I really enjoyed.
Yeah.
And fairly simply too, so it sort of all fell into place.
Yeah, and the colors themselves, like when you really like sink into them, not only are they in this sort of really lovely architecture that reminds me of like either children's illustrations or like sort of a softer like circus, or even like just also like beach colors. I don't know. It's so they're soft, gentle. They are actually also faded in a way, and other than the glaze chemistry, the palette itself, was there like any emotions you were hoping to accomplish or bring through with this color palette that you chose?
I mean, I did want it to reference sort of like a childlike palette, and sort of a version of a rainbow, I would say. I mean, there's a purple, green, yellow, orange, right? So there's everything's there. But I definitely wanted it to feel playful and soft and sort of welcoming. A lot of my previous work was kind of dealing with one color very monochrome.
Yeah.
And the reactions that I got to those colors were it was sort of serious. And people took it very seriously. If it's one color, it must mean something deep and we don't really understand what that is. Why did you choose just purple? But I wanted something that was more playful and also referencing nature too. Living in, and I also think that they're kind of, in a way, like very Los Angeles.
Yes.
Like make Los Angeles landscape. So yeah, playful but also natural
and then also, I know probably indigo's in here, but what other natural dyes were you using?
So yeah, indigo is the dark to light blue. Logwood is the purple on the edges, and it's also the purple on the catalytic. There's two shades of madder root, so the light orange and the dark orange. And then sappingwood is the pink, and the green is, the yellow is weld, and then the green is weld with an indigo dip.
What is weld?
I don't know.
Okay, it's a powder. I got it.
That's the one I haven't researched. Yeah. The others are like different barks and plants. I'm not really sure what it is. I think it is a flower.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this brings me back to talk about, which is you're sinking into this like sort of memory with sincerity, but at the same time you're decorating it, or at least giving it personality and life and an emotional tone.
Yeah.
Even though it sort of has these like more, I would say adult themes of just thinking even about housing insecurity, thinking about sort of theft as well, as a possibility, and sort of the weird shifting between like what is mine, what is yours. And then you have this third tertiary element of just like sort of this outside observer, where like the tent itself has this difference between interior exterior. It's very soft architecture, it's not a hard wall. You have these windows that are sort of letting in light in this sort of filtered view, and then finally you also have this chair that is in the corner, sort of as this like silent viewer or watcher or something. And I know that from sort of past conversations there, I don't know, I was wondering if you could go into that. Was that like, how are you hoping the viewer is going to interact within this sort of strange observer space or installation as well?
I'm really aware of the sort of idea of the spectator when I'm working. I think you and I talked about how I sort of, in my therapizing of myself, I have realized that I am always watching myself. So I am making something and I am sort of observing myself making the thing.
And then when you're watching yourself, are you sort of correcting or overcorrecting, or is it more
correcting, judging,
all the things that
critiquing, all of those. And so I think that idea has definitely seeped into both this work and previous work. Previous work, I was working with these cliff swallow nests that sort of had this weird surveillance aspect to them. They had an opening that felt like an eyeball in a way, or like a camera could be in it.
Or sort of provided a viewpoint, like a very specific mode of operation.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think that feeling is just something that I sort of incidentally end up weaving into the installation process. I don't know that it's something that I'm intentionally crafting as I'm making things, but as I'm placing things in a space, I tend to create a spectator.
A spectator. And kind of going into like how you think about narrative too, then, and how the narrator or viewer is going to sort of operate through that.
Yeah. And in terms of like interior exterior space, one thing that I was thinking about as I was making and installing work is whether or not the tent would be open.
Yes.
And whether or not I would allow people to go into the space. And I thought, originally I thought I had a very bodily reaction to that of like, no one can go in. And originally I thought, okay, I should challenge that. I'm having such a reaction to that. Maybe I should allow just anybody to go through it.
Okay.
And then I thought, oh, that's totally unnecessary. And this process of deciding that, I thought, oh, well, I am creating a barrier, sort of fabricating the level of comfort that I have in making the tent. So it has windows, you can see inside. It is soft and sort of feels vulnerable in that way, fragile in that way, but it does have a closed entrance. So it's like, I'm giving a little.
And not complete access into something that is still something that you're trying to explore with Sensei. Like it's your exploration, but not quite everyone else's.
And I think the same with the windows. They end up functioning in a similar way. Like you can see through some aspects of them from the outside, but for the most part, it's acting as such a curtain or a barrier.
And then the other lovely thing that you pointed out that other people listening to this might not understand is that there's a really beautiful blue glass frame, like a window behind this left-hand side one, and it does really completely tinge the scene with that blue light that sort of comes through as well. So basically, these works are soft sculpture and soft architecture to me, like
Yeah.
what I would consider, just thinking about our urban environment or even just the moments of a tent and literally the soft architecture that you've like paneled in between it
Yeah.
to create these like sort of atmospheric moments, this tension between the fragile and the soft. And so we've talked a little bit about just sort of this outside observer, but where do you like, where is the body in the work? Is it the viewer? Is it you?
Yeah.
Is it these objects? Like where do you visualize that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a bodily aspect to the objects themselves. I think you mentioned the tent feeling like a skin.
Oh yeah.
Which I like that.
And these ones are very organ.
Yeah,
like
very sort of digestive in a way, or like,
yeah.
and then I don't know, digestive, but also sort of respiratory and esophageal. I don't know.
Or just even like when humans are just like lounging or just like completely deflated.
Yeah.
It really seems like a moment of just like relieved tension that's sort of falling down.
And I also think the body is present in the absence of the body, if that makes sense, or like the space where a body could occupy. So the empty chair, the empty tent, sort of the contours of the body pillow, sort of waiting for a body to fill them. So I thought about that a little bit, and also the spectator acting as sort of a tertiary body in a way.
Would you consider the viewer activating it, or just sort of again being like a bystander or sort of nomad through this space?
I think it kind of depends on how you're entering the space, but you know, my inclination when I walk up to the pillow is to like rest my head on it. And a lot of people have asked if they can go into the tent, so it's like I think it depends on what your response to the work is.
I actually really wanted to sit in the chair.
Or sit in a chair.
No, exactly.
Yeah, so I think it can be activated, or maybe the spectator is only in existence if you are not activating the space. Yeah.
Okay, that's some like lovely tension. Yeah, and then I guess I said it. What's the question? Let's see. I guess one of the things I wanted to talk about was this relationship between like decoration and like nomadic, and just you mentioned really briefly thinking about housing insecurity, or even just when we think about concepts of home and how we decorate places to make them ours. Was that something you were thinking about, or just if you could also open that up a little bit?
Totally. You know, the tents are often considered temporary and permanent, nomadic, but a lot of time, you know, in Los Angeles, they are not. And I think the way that we communicate permanence is often through decoration, or like claiming space through making something ours. So, you know, I drive through downtown Los Angeles to get to work every day, and if you're near the fabric district, you'll see people decorating their homes with fabric from the parts out on the street. So you'll see a tent with sequins or tools or something like that. And I think that display of decoration should communicate to us that it is a more permanent place, that shouldn't be, you know, swept away by bulldozer, or, you know. So I do want to kind of have people leaving the exhibition with this idea that a tent is not just a nomadic thing that can be moved. It isn't just a tool for camping temporarily. It is also a permanent place that people ascribe meaning and home to.
And I would even, now that we're sitting here talking about it too, like even the tent itself, it seems very you, and yet there isn't anything inside of it, which I would normally think of as like a sort of the period of time between, you said 8 and 12. Yes, that you would have something there that was you, and so it's also interesting to me that you've orchestrated, drawn for us something that's from your past, and yet you are still sort of keeping a distance from the viewer. It's not complete honesty, but it's
an attempt.
It's an attempt.
I thought for a long time it was something that I could put inside of it, but I think the tent itself was like the most personal object that I associated with that time period. Like I was like, what would I don't even know what I had inside of that tent besides a mattress and pillows or whatever. And so anything else to add into it, I thought made it too much of it became too personal. I was like, well, what do I want you to see when you look in there? No, I want you to see the tent. I don't want you to see more than what the tent is. So just another way to like use the tent as both an opaque object and a transparent object, a barrier and an attempt at sincerity.
Just checking the time really carefully. 5:11. Okay, we have about 15 more minutes. But I would like to also talk. You talked about it briefly. I wanted to ask, did you come, this is a residency space, Blue Roof is sort of offering it, has 3 upcoming artists that will happen this year, and you were their fall member. Did you come to this space with that intention of this work and sort of examining this past moment? And then also just to, how did it allow you to grow or explore as an artist here?
I did come to the residency with this piece in mind. I didn't know about the rest of it, but I did know that I wanted to make the tent here. I felt like this place, in this specific community, there would be sort of a judgment-free zone, a place to make something that talks about housing insecurity and poverty and my experience with that and have people nearby that could relate to that experience. I think I don't think this would have occurred if I chosen to do it at like a craft residency on the East Coast.
Or in the middle of the woods.
Yeah, during the middle of the woods, during the wood firing. So yeah, when I encountered this residency, I thought that this would be the perfect place to do this idea that I've been throwing around for a little while. And then in terms of growth, I mean, it's been like 1.5 to 2 years since I've had my own studio space, besides my living room. And so having the opportunity to just stretch out and exist and make things with some level of privacy and freedom was really valuable to me.
And then I was also going to say, since just your work in general, it seems to have this relationship between both the conceptual and the process. And so, like, working through the construction of this piece is actually quite long term. It's not just sort of a simple, like, sort of one and done thing. It really is sort of like even making these catalytic converters or the chair itself, there's a time and a process and a way of making. How, when you're working, do you approach it? Is it more of a, I know what I want to do, it's going to look like this, we're going, okay.
No, I don't, I know the object that I want to make. And specifically with the tent, I tried to avoid, and I didn't realize this until afterwards, but you can find like sewing instructions for tents, like miniature dollhouse size tents, or like for your American Girl doll, like sewing patterns for those. And I kind of intentionally avoided seeking those out, because because I'll have an object that I'd like to make, but I know I need to translate it through my experience of that object. I'm not really interested in like a lot of trompe l'oeil, recreating one-to-one. And I think showing the hand of, my hand, is important for something so personal. Process is where I kind of figure out how things are going to look, how exact or inexact something will be. So I have like a general idea of how it could be accomplished, but no like guidelines or anything like that.
Okay. I guess it seems that like you've cannibalized some of the other objects from your past, or that you've sort of been making through these last 2.5 years, and sort of encourage them to participate in this narrative of like sort of memory and sincerity and things like that. But I have a question, like, where are you going next? Is it more things with exploring the sort of sincere exploration of the tent, or is there another project that you see yourself going to next?
Yeah, I feel like this has been my moment with like true vulnerability and sincerity.
Wait, can I ask how so?
I don't think I'm interested in like mining more like the emotional like traumatic moments of my past for the rest of my artistic career. At least so deeply. Like I think that was the hurdle that I needed to overcome. And in the future, I think I really want to make a full-sized car out of it.
Okay.
That's the plan.
A car pillow. Will we be able to go in it?
I don't see how.
Okay, fair enough. Let's just rest some stuff on top of it.
It won't be a tent. It won't be a tent. So yeah, it won't have a door. But you could try.
Yeah, very cool. And then I guess just as a way to sort of like punctuate it here, and it's okay if there's nothing. The answer is no. Do you find yourself currently in conversation with artists, or this show in particular?
Yeah.
You wanted to be in conversation either with some of the artists currently, or
I mean, I suppose while I was making this, I was looking a lot at Carmen Argot.
Yes.
I think her work is amazing, and she's really works really actively engaging her city and her personal history in a way that I find really inspiring. And then obviously, like I'm looking at like Douglas.
Yeah. Obviously, some people don't know Douglas stuff, but he does really question what home is.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to a video, and he said something about packing away his home into a suitcase. And
Okay. And then last minute, very strange question that I like to ask everyone. What do you normally listen to or do when you're making? Do you like watch TV, books? What is it? Or music?
While I was making these, I was watching a show on Amazon. It's a British reality show or competition show called Portrait Artist of the Year.
Oh, I actually have not watched that.
It's had to dig a little bit to find it, but it's amateur and professional portrait artists competing to be the portrait artist of the year in Britain.
Yeah. Sorry, the only reason I bring it up and like to ask everyone is because I've just been thinking about how that also influences how we think about narrative.
Yeah.
Where is it more episodic? Is it more individualized? Is it sort of the string together thing?
Yeah.
I even know that we've had a conversation on where we are, is it more like an EP or an album or a best sort of hit? Sometimes I find that the things that we're digesting also kind of influence how we're thinking about objects and things like that.
I will say it did make me think more about painting than I have for a really long time, and how and it made me want to paint.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You don't think of this as, or is it more of an like an internalization of color?
I would say it's more of an internalization of color. Or I didn't see this as painting quite a bit, but I can see how it. I can see it as a painting in the future.
In the future.
Yeah.
Oh, that's so fascinating. I feel like we didn't even cover that. But it was, do you feel like it's also a sculptural material that you've imbued with something, or is it just sort of the natural dyeing process?
I think just the way I was originally constructing it, I constructed the individual sides on the wall originally. So I saw the tent on the wall first, and the way that I laid colors next to each other and overlap them did sort of remind me of, intentionally choosing like a brush stroke.
Yeah. Or even just sort of the fast gesturing of like sort of drawing itself too, if it's more in this two-dimensional thing. Is there anything else that you wanted that I didn't actually start to cover? This is great. Okay, well, I guess then we will open it up for questions if there are anything that you guys want to ask about the show or to Natalie specifically.
I was going to say, so I'm really big on symbols, you know this, and whether you realize it or not, I mean, first of all, like just as a viewer and listening to the talk, this like anchors the show really well, because whether you thought of it or not, but catalytic converters, well, I mean, it's a filtering system, right?
Yeah.
And sorry, bear with me. You said earlier that you were filtering fact and fiction.
Yeah.
So that almost, like, it fits well together after listening to the conversation and respond to the work. One thing I will say, and this isn't like an attitude towards the work, but like I've never seen catalytic converters like in a space like this or anywhere really. My relationship with to catalytic converters was, I've had older cars throughout the years. It was always like something negative because smog check comes around and it's like a financial burden. I never see catalytic converters in a positive way. But this is like the first time I'm seeing it. Well, like as a filtering system. So that works really well, and I just really tell you my reaction as a viewer. So it's so well done.
Cool. Thank you. I wasn't initially thinking of them as a filtering system, but it just it did. They are sort of like the lung of the car in a way. And so, there's like a certain airiness to them. And originally, the ceramics are so tied to the vessel. The ability for something to, something to contain. And I thought it was important to, not only have these open-ended, but for the viewer to possibly see through them also. And if you are able to like get really into them, they have like, some of them have this weird like mirrored surface on the inside that is a little trippy, for lack of a better word. I just really enjoy them as an object aesthetically now, which is,
I have a couple comments. So, one, Carmen and Doho seem like perfect people that you're looking at. You might want to add, there's a sculptor named Leah Jensen up in the Pacific Northwest. she did this series where she would collect mufflers that collected on the side of the road and upholster them. So it was like she considered it like roadkill in a certain way that she was kind of modifying and turning into these beautiful objects. I'm kind of curious about this sort of sandwich I'm seeing where through it's like this transformation and softening of harsh phenomena such as theft and violation, difficult early memory, and quilting is, historically something that's very nurturing and caring and that kind of thing, to try to just sort of soften the harshness of it all, but how there's a very distinct stop sign or something, like you're dealing with the skin of the tent, but again, you're like extremely protective of the interior, which I would really associate with the memory of a young girl, You have a seat possibly for a viewer, but it's stuck at a distance in the corner, and you're not really sure the chair would support weight, or whether the crocheted part of the leg implies a broken leg or something, you know what I mean? So it's like, you can look, but from a distance, and you may collapse the chair. So it's like this, so I'm kind of curious about this sort of protectiveness of where you let someone in, like up to a certain point, and then it's like, no, we're not going to go any further than that. So, so like the softening, it only, it in a way it stops at the skin or something, or stops at the transformation of the object itself, but that's where you want to stop, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you could speak to that a little bit. And I'm not saying that I crave, come on, spill your guts out, girl, you need to see it, It's not that, but it's kind of, it makes me curious about this urge to sort of digest and ingest and dealing with all the shit we're dealing with, kind of thing. Like it's necessary. It's almost like a recycling or composting sort of thing, but what does that limit mean? What does that sort of like, I don't want you to pass beyond this line mean?
Yeah, I think for me it's sort of a limit to my trust, trusting of the viewer or my audience, and not really the tent is the only object here that I've decided is not for sale, right? So I think where we are, especially where we are in the contemporary art field, is this sort of, we've reached this point of where a lot of us are selling, and are selling our personal histories and identities for the larger in making this, I'm sort of, art is self-expression, but it also is now a market, and things are for sale, or things are, people, view them not just as art, but as like a product. And so as I'm making things, I'm thinking, okay, how much of my internal narrative am I willing to sort of give away for sale? And that's usually where I decide that stopping point will go. Like I'm willing to offer up certain things, certain stories as an object that I feel others can relate to, and like, you know, I think not everyone, but a lot of people have had their catalytic converters stolen, or but the stopping point for the tent comes a little bit sooner, just because I don't know if this is at all answering your question.
Well, what you're saying makes me curious, like whether you should develop two bodies of work then, you know, one where you just don't even think about the objectness and saleability, you know what I mean? Because then it doesn't enter into the equation.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah.
I was going to say that was a fascinating question because it brought up for me ownership of your subjecthood. If you're thinking about, like, again, either what sort of story it is for self from your own identity, like what makes you you, and thinking about that barrier between how much is someone or the community or the collective or the group of friends going to know about me personally. That's sort of where that question became like a really interesting line and stopping point. And then sort of how that ownership of that subjecthood can get scaled through objects, is sort of where I kind of connected all those things from your question and also the objects you're making in this space. Yeah, because again, a lot of these works that you're making are also for sale as objects. Had Big Five, all these things. So there is this sort of imbued subjecthood into them, and they're sort of also taking on this active life of storytelling and narrative. But you're right, there is like a very harsh line that also could be explored in the future. That barrier between how much you're letting the person into or out of the space.
Yeah.
What's next?
I don't know if you want me to go into anything more.
Okay. Oh, sorry.
I mean, I guess I'm kind of thinking of like, you're essentially commodifying like identity or commodifying your personal narrative. So like, if you're, you know, objectifying these objects in that way, or those narratives in that objective that way, like, would you consider this more like an heirloom than, because ultimately, like, you know, we still accumulate all these objects, whether or not we're willing to release them into the world as like, for someone else to steward them. But like, what's your plan with the tent then, slash, like, where does it land for you as far as like, what you want? You know, I don't think like it's good or healthy to like create in a way where like, we're thinking of where this piece is gonna land, right? Because otherwise we probably never make stuff. But, yeah, just wondering that you want the piece to like, you know, it's life after this, I guess. If it's not to commodify it.
Well, I'm gonna take it camping.
Cool.
But I like that idea that acting is more of an heirloom than anything. And yeah, I haven't, I've thought about it even, I'd like to make like a specific way of storing it also. So it's not just sitting in a plastic bag in my storage unit, you know? But, yeah, I like that word, heirloom.
I'm just really interested in the tension between like what is up on the wall and what's on the ground, what's hard and what's soft, and these like parts that are on the ground resting on something that's soft. And if you could just speak more about the relationship between those two.
I really enjoyed the way the pillow kind of slumps a little bit, and I wanted to be able to demonstrate that, hitting my mic. But these guys, you know, when you, in making these and then displaying these, I'm always thinking of the, so how I know the catalytic converter is through a Google image search, essentially. And one of the images that you see, specifically a Prius catalytic converter 2008, you'll see just images of catalytic converters in a big pile that have been recovered by the police. And they're just like hundreds of them. And so originally I thought, oh, I'll just pile them up on the floor. But I did start to feel more precious about them, I suppose. Not enough to want them to have their own like pedestal or shelf, but enough to want them to feel a little bit protected from the ground.
It's also a really nice accompaniment to thinking about your memory and then the overlay of your image repertoire as a consideration, and just how that's also like infiltrating sort of what you've given the viewer itself.
Yeah. Yeah, and then I also wanted to kind of create a line and movement within the space that could kind of reach across the room and interact with that. And so I had this erosion tube, but I dyed, and I liked also the implication of the erosion tube as something that holds back or protects something from, a landslide or debris. So it's both like for me, like it's like a protective symbol while also being something like creature-like.
Again, thank you so much for joining us today. Again, during these like really devastating times, thank you for coming out and making time for this. It's really appreciated. And thank you, Blue Roof.